Hello world. So I didn't announce this live video today, but this information just kind of flowed in this morning during my morning yoga practice, and I just want to share it. I just want to put it out into the world. Hopefully this medicine will help you on your path of healing. But today I really wanted to talk about mindful cannabis consumption. So I have I have some people in my life who have been telling me that cannabis gives them anxiety, or I have people who are trying cannabis for the first time or who really want to integrate it into their practice. So I'm just putting together this little discussion around things you can do to practice mindful cannabis consumption and to really create a supportive experience so that you will like cannabis and that it can actually enhance your yoga practice and your spiritual practices and even the quality of your life. There's not a lot of knowledge around how to consume mindfully. There's just not a lot of information available because it's been illegal for so long. So let's dive into that. And of course, I'm going to start this session by smoking a little bit of herb. So I like to always use hemp wick. It's hemp string with beeswax wrapped around it. It burns really slowly. And this way when I smoke, I'm not getting those harmful chemicals from butane and stuff from the lighter. This is a little piece that I just got. It's a little, not really a one hitter, it's a chillum. So just a little bowl. I just got this recently. It's very pretty. Good quality cannabis right there. So, mindful cannabis consumption 101. Here we go. So the first thing I want to talk about is because cannabis has been illegal in our country for so long, there's not a lot of really great research. Okay, so a lot of the statistics, a lot of the things we see, a lot of the information, especially in the Western kind of science world about cannabis, is very limited because there's not a lot of funding, there's not a lot of resources and ways for us to really study the cannabis plant. And of course that's changing now with the legalization. But one of the things that I think causes the most anxiety with cannabis is the fact that the plants are grown to have such a high THC content, and that would be fine, but these plants are grown with the main focus being on the THC cannabinoids. And just like an essential oil, where the essential oils are just taking one constituent of the plant and concentrating it, and you're not really getting the benefits from the entire plant, the same thing happens with cannabis production, especially when it has to go through, now that it's legalizing, there's these processes that cannabis has to go through for it to be legal. And so we're seeing this process where the plant's being processed and it has a really high THC content, not a lot of CBD, not a lot of THCA. There's over 100 cannabinoids and strands that exist, or cannabinoids that exist within a cannabis plant. And so what we want to create for a holistic cannabis consumption is the entourage effect. So we want to have a good variety of cannabinoids in our cannabis. So that could mean taking some CBD oil, maybe like 10 or 15 minutes before you consume your cannabis. Then you have that CBD in your system, it's interacting with the THC, and you have this entourage effect of all the endocannabinoids, or all of the cannabinoids working together. And we want that because they support each other. So CBD is really interacting with our nerves and our nervous system. It's a very soothing constituent of the plant, where THC is more psychoactive. It's going to give us more of that euphoric high. So we want to have them together. They really balance each other out. And there's still so much science to be discovered and learned and shared about how these cannabinoids work together, and how the entourage effect can really boost our overall well-being. So the first thing to think about when you're consuming cannabis is knowing that there's a lot of THC in it, especially if you're buying it illegally and you can't see what those numbers are on the side of a medicine bottle, right? So if you're in California or Oregon or Washington, wherever, and you're buying cannabis, on the side of the bottle, it's going to tell you, or the jar, it's going to say, 20% THC, and it's usually like 0.05% CBD. Like, even in these legal states, there's not a lot of CBD in these plants. Most plants are just really concentrated on getting that high THC content, which is fine, right? Like, being high is nice, it's beautiful, it's euphoric. But again, especially if you're someone that kind of struggles with anxiety in general, that could be an overload. So you want to add that CBD. So add CBD to your weed consumption. Just get some CBD oil, take it, smoke it, get some CBD flower. Or if you are somewhere where you have access to a nice balanced plant, or if you can grow it yourself, smoke flower or use cannabis that has a good variety of all of the cannabinoids in it. Another thing to consider is what kind of weed you're smoking. So if you get a really nice sativa weed, and you're already struggling with anxiety, that's not really going to be a good experience. It'll probably add more anxiety, because sativa is more of an uplifting or kind of cannabis. So maybe look for more of an indica type of cannabis. So indica cannabis is actually from India originally. That's why it's called indica. And so to help you remember this, I think of, okay, indica weed is from India. So think of these ancient yogis meditating. Really, cannabis is a huge part of the history of yoga and Indian spirituality. It's still used and practiced. It's drunk and it's smoked and everything. But just think of that indica weed as like this supportive plant for your meditation practice. It can actually be a very soothing and calming experience. So if you have the opportunity to know what strand of weed you're smoking, and you can shop for your cannabis, go get those indica strands for relaxation, and that will help reduce anxiety. And just find a strand that works for you. You might have to try a couple different types of cannabis before you find the one that works really well for you, just like anything else, right? And the third thing here is moderation. So I don't know about you, but the first time I smoked weed, especially for the first few years I smoked weed, I was younger, I was in high school. There was a lot of kind of the cool factor and peer pressure involved in my cannabis experiences, and I just smoked way too much. I'd be smoking a blunt or a bong and would just get so ripped, and I would get into this place where I would start to feel uncomfortable. In hindsight, for me, that was probably because I was hanging out with people that, and hanging out in places that weren't really conducive to my spiritual growth. So that was coming up for me, and it made me feel anxious. But as an adult cannabis consumer now, and consuming cannabis from a space of sobriety and mindfulness, my approach is much different. And with cannabis, just like anything else that you're trying for the first time, you want to try just a little bit and kind of build onto that. So start with a low dose, and I'll kind of talk about that more in the next few examples. But just like any medication that you take, if you take too much of it, you're going to have negative side effects. The same thing goes for cannabis. It's a medicine. It's not to be taken lightly. We must respect the plant, and we must, and kind of really be mindful with our consumption. So, take it really slow. Take a little puff off of a joint, wait half an hour, see how you feel. If you want more, take 2 puffs off the joint. Don't feel like you have to take a blunt to the head or rip a bong to be included in cannabis consumption. One trick that I've had, especially when I'm going into social situations where I know that cannabis will be passed around and stuff, like at a party or a show or whatever, is I just bring my own. And if you bring your own weed and you have your own little pipe, you know, and I've always been like a smoker where I have just like little pieces and I just kind of smoke my own. I'll share with others, you know, but I don't feel like I have to consume a lot of cannabis and kind of keep up with somebody else when I'm kind of claiming it as my own way of medicating myself. So moderate yourself, take your time. Smoking flower is the easiest way to control your high. So when you eat edibles, they can sneak up on you for a lot of different reasons, which is kind of another conversation. But you know, and edibles just take a long time to kick in. I mean, it can be like 2 hours before you really feel stoned. So, you know, if you're wanting to have a lot more control around how high you're going to get and how long it's going to last, that's why I recommend smoking cannabis. And that's why I think smoking cannabis is just the most popular form of cannabis consumption. When you smoke weed, you get that effect right away. Your peak is in about 30 minutes, 15 to 30 minutes, and your high is about 2 hours. So that's a much more manageable way to use it, and especially if you're someone who needs it right away, like if you're feeling nauseous or you need that boost right away, when you smoke cannabis, you receive that medicine immediately. You know, edibles are more for like chronic pain, or maybe you're going like, you know, to work or somewhere where you're going to be there for like 8 hours, like then an edible makes a lot more sense because you're going to have that high with you for many hours. But, you know, same thing with edibles. You really want to work your way into them. You want to, you know, start small and, you know, and find your place that you're comfortable with there. So, yeah, smoking flower, great way to have more control and kind of be in the driver's seat with your high. And then you really have to consider your environment, okay? So cannabis is plant medicine. When you consume cannabis, you are shifting into a space of higher awareness, all right? Maybe even hyper awareness. And the things that you may have a guilty conscience about are gonna bubble up right away. So if you're with someone, you know, if you're in a toxic relationship, or if you're in a toxic environment, or if you're even in a toxic state of mind and you smoke cannabis, you know, it's not like heroin or some other type of drug where you just escape and you're gone. Or like, I shouldn't say heroin because I've never done heroin, but let's say like alcohol, like you get that disassociation. That's not what's happening with cannabis. You're actually going to be more present in that experience. So this is where it becomes medicine. So, you know, what you can do is make sure when you're using cannabis, you're around people you're comfortable with. You know, you're with a trusted friend or partner, or maybe even by yourself. Like maybe you're not around people because that's what you're doing to create a safe environment for you. You know, maybe it's not as soon as like when you're about to get into the car and drive somewhere, or when you have to show up somewhere where there's expectations on you to perform. Like these are not situations where you're probably going to feel the most comfortable being stoned, or at least not right away. You know, as you get used to cannabis and as it becomes this just part of your life, or this medicine that you're taking and you're regulating it and it feels good to you, you know, I smoke cannabis daily and I can function in my life daily, and you know, because I have that routine and that rhythm. So, you know, create an environment that is conducive to your high. You know, get on your yoga mat, practice meditation, do some journaling, do some artwork, you know, explore the possibilities of what cannabis can offer to you, because it is very healing. It does soothe our sympathetic nervous system. It allows us to really shift out of fight or flight and move into a deeper state of awareness and being. So give yourself a supportive environment to consume cannabis in. Let every smoke session be intentional. You know, I love intentionally smoking. You know, why are you getting high? And if you keep that intention there, then you don't have to worry about that slippery slope of addiction, or, you know, kind of taking advantage and using it in a way that's not really healing. Just being mindful can just keep that negative voice out of your head, and just help you feel more confident in your smoking or your cannabis consumption choices. And finally, you know, like I kind of said earlier, using your tools, breath work and meditation. When you're consuming cannabis, if you start to feel overwhelmed, do your yoga, just like you would in any other place in your life. When you start to feel overwhelmed, take a few deep breaths, ground yourself, feel the ground beneath you. I am here, I am safe, I am okay. I have never heard of someone dying from being too high on cannabis. Your body will regulate. If you get to a place where your peak is really intense, first of all, just remind yourself, okay, I took it too far and this is not comfortable for me and I'm not going to do it again. All right, so make that commitment, sign that contract, so then you can let go of the guilt or the shame or whatever comes up around that, and remind yourself that you're going to be okay and ride it out. So take your deep breaths, move a little bit. I've found, because I explore cannabis consumption all the time, so I've definitely gotten to those places of whew, all right, this is a little heavy. I think I ate a little bit too much of that weed brownie, or, I took it too far, or whatever. That's fine, because, I know it's going to be okay. It's medicine. I'm not going to get poisoned. I'm not going to overdose. It can't happen. So just breathe. Doing a little bit of movement always helps me. Doing some dancing, doing some yoga, maybe going on a walk, just being active and kind of just sweating and moving will help that high move along. And also eating food and drinking water. So really keep yourself hydrated, drink lots of water, lots of herbal tea, and then eat some good foods. Eat some fruit, eat some hummus, eat a nice uplifting snack, and that food in your belly will also help to calm that high and kind of bring you back to a place that feels good. So even if you peak, you're going to start to come back down, and you're going to experience the benefits of cannabis for hours. It's gonna, because our endocannabinoid system is a really important part of our makeup, and it's nourished when we smoke cannabis. So these are just a few ways for you to kind of manage your high and to, face anxieties that you may experience when you smoke, and have some tools. So I'm going to continue to offer, tools on consuming cannabis, because cannabis has just been such a beautiful part of my spiritual journey. So, ask me questions, stay in touch, and, keep doing your research. And your research is, smoking a little bit of cannabis and reading a book, or doing some yoga. I have a couple books I can show you all real quick that I think are good. All right, so if you want a little bit of literature to kind of learn more about cannabis, because it is happening, we're getting really good books and stuff being written now, and we're destigmatizing cannabis and really discovering all of its medicinal benefits, or should I say rediscovering. This is a great book. It's called Smoke Signals. It's a book about the story, just the history of cannabis. And I really like this perspective because the author is just a really good author. So witty, funny, intelligent, definitely uses the stories and voices of people who are well respected and extremely talented, who have used cannabis and have always been supportive of cannabis, like Louis Armstrong, just really amazing people. So this is a really great book to give you a kind of a look. This is called A Social History of Marijuana, Medical, Recreational, and Scientific. But this is, I think everyone should read this book if you're interested in learning about cannabis, because it just gives you the truth of why it became illegalized and the prohibition of cannabis, and how it really shook a lot of people's lives. People went from using cannabis every day, especially in the jazz community, especially in communities of enlightenment and healing. Cannabis was used even in our medicine. And when the prohibition began, it was very intentional. It was very detrimental to our health and our healing. And so understanding this history helps to destigmatize the plant and, create a better future for cannabis consumption. We need to learn more about this, right? So another book this was a friend of mine who gifted this to me. It's called The Emperor Wears No Clothes. And the writer of this book is a very interesting fella. This is like the 12th edition of this. He's had, every year finding new information. But it's a collection of articles, newspaper clippings. He follows, I can't remember the names exactly. Oh, look, Kentucky hemp fields. So Kentucky was such a huge part of the hemp industry. But this is like, talk about propaganda. He breaks down all the propaganda, shows how racism is connected to the prohibition of cannabis, really just breaks down the politics of it. So this is a great one, especially if you're someone who enjoys exposing conspiracy. Cannabis being illegalized is one of the biggest conspiracies that exist in our culture. So definitely that's a great book. And then Ganja Yoga. So this woman, I do like what she's saying about cannabis. I love that there's a teacher out here a yoga teacher who is loud and proud about the fact that they use cannabis to enhance their yoga practice. And there's a lot of good information in this book, like kind of like Cannabis 101, learning about the different strands and the different effects and how you can use it in your yoga practice. And she has some good recipes in here as well. So this is kind of a good just like coffee table yoga book to have. I've read it a couple times and it's some good stuff. And she writes, she's funny and her voice is just really nice. So this is a good book to read too if you're kind of looking, to use cannabis with your yoga practice especially. All right, you all, so I hope that you enjoyed these tips, just some ways to help you reduce anxiety when you're smoking and to have a more supportive cannabis experience. Stay tuned for more information. Of course, I'm always here to answer questions. Namaste, friends.